You won't believe what happens in today's story. It's one you definitely won't forget. If you love thrilling, eerie, and downright mind-blowing stories, then you're in the right place. My name's Charlie, and welcome to Charlie's Tales, where we bring you 2 spine-chilling stories every Wednesday and every Friday. So, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, and while you're at it, throw that like button straight into an erupting volcano. Now, let's dive in. In the fall of 1998, David and Sarah Mercer stood in the circular driveway of the grand Victorian mansion that had just become theirs, their faces glowing with pride and excitement. After years of cramped apartment living in Chicago, they'd finally saved enough for their dream home, a sprawling 19th century estate in rural Michigan, complete with wraparound porch, turrets, and 5 acres of wooded land. At 38 and 36, respectively, with their children Ethan, 13, and Rebecca, 9, they felt they'd finally arrived. The purchase price had been suspiciously low for such a magnificent property, but the real estate agent explained that the house had been on the market for nearly 3 years, and the bank was eager to offload it. When David asked why such a beautiful home hadn't sold, the agent mumbled something about the rural location and the maintenance costs of historic properties. Neither explanation seemed particularly convincing, but the Mercers were too enchanted with the ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, and spacious rooms to press the issue. What the agent deliberately failed to disclose, what would have been revealed by even the most cursory conversation with locals, was that no family had remained in the house for more than 7 months since 1972. The property had cycled through 11 owners in 26 years, each leaving more hastily than the last. Some cited financial difficulties, others family emergencies that called them away. But residents of the small town of Harlow knew better. They called it the breathing house in hushed conversations at the local diner, though never within earshot of newcomers or the occasional tourist. The Mercers' first month in their new home passed in a pleasant blur of unpacking, minor renovations, and exploring. David, an architect who worked primarily from home, set up his office in a bright corner room on the 2nd floor with views of the ancient oak trees that surrounded the property. Sarah, a high school English teacher, had found a position at the local school. The children were adjusting well, Rebecca delighted in having a room large enough for her growing collection of dolls, while Ethan appreciated the basement's potential as a band practice space for his fledgling interest in the drums. It was on the 34th day after moving in that the first undeniably strange occurrence took place. Sarah was alone in the house, grading papers at the kitchen table while everyone else was out. David meeting a client in town, Ethan at a friend's house, and Rebecca at soccer practice. The afternoon was peaceful until Sarah heard what sounded like someone slowly climbing the back staircase, the servants' stairs from a bygone era that led from the kitchen directly to the 2nd floor. The steps were distinct, a slow, dragging footfall followed by a thump, as if the person were injured or pulling something heavy. Sarah called out, assuming David had returned early, but received no response. The footsteps continued their measured pace. Concerned, she grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer and cautiously approached the narrow stairwell. As she reached the bottom step, the footsteps, which had been approaching the top of the stairs, abruptly reversed direction, now heading back up toward the 3rd floor. Sarah climbed the stairs and searched both the 2nd and 3rd floors thoroughly. She found nothing, no signs of an intruder, no open windows, not even a squirrel or raccoon that might have found its way in. When the family returned home and she described what had happened, David suggested old houses simply made strange noises as they settled. Ethan looked skeptical but said nothing. Rebecca, however, nodded knowingly and said, "That's probably just the sad lady. I've heard her too." When pressed, Rebecca matter-of-factly explained that sometimes at night she heard a woman crying in the hallway outside her room. She hadn't mentioned it because she didn't want her parents to think she was scared of their new home. Sarah and David exchanged concerned glances, but ultimately chalked it up to an overactive imagination, influenced by the admittedly gothic atmosphere of their Victorian home. They might have been able to dismiss the incident entirely if similar occurrences hadn't begun with increasing frequency. The dragging footsteps on the back stairs became a regular phenomenon, always when someone was alone in the house, always stopping when investigated. Cold spots appeared in hallways and corners where no draft could explain them. Spots so cold that walking through them caused an instant shiver and goosebumps. The family cat, Luna, refused to enter certain rooms, arching her back and hissing at empty corners. By the end of their second month in the house, the whole family had experienced something unsettling. David reported seeing movement from the corner of his eye while working late, like someone walking past his office doorway, only to find the hallway empty when he looked up. Ethan complained that someone kept rearranging his belongings. Items he distinctly remembered leaving on his desk would be found neatly arranged on his bookshelf. And Rebecca began having trouble sleeping, claiming that her dolls would sometimes change positions during the night, turning to face her bed instead of the wall where she placed them. Sarah, initially the most skeptical, became convinced something was truly wrong after what happened in the master bathroom. While taking a shower one evening, she noticed the mirror over the sink beginning to fog up, despite the exhaust fan running. As the steam accumulated, words became visible on the glass, as if traced by an invisible finger. "Get out while you can." Sarah called for David, but by the time he arrived, the mirror had cleared, leaving no trace of the message. As November turned to December, the phenomena intensified. Family photographs placed on walls or mantels would be found face down or turned to face the wall. The temperature in Rebecca's room plummeted at night, regardless of how high they set the thermostat. The sound of breaking glass would wake them at precisely 3:17 every morning, yet they never found anything damaged. And perhaps most disturbingly, they began to find small puddles of water throughout the house, on the stairs, in hallways, at the foot of beds, with no discernible source. The water always felt ice cold to the touch and evaporated much more quickly than it should have. David and Sarah might have been able to rationalize these events, faulty plumbing, drafty windows, house settling, if not for what happened on December 12th, exactly 3 months after they'd moved in. The family had gone to bed after a relatively peaceful evening. Around 2 in the morning, they were awakened by Rebecca's screams. David and Sarah rushed to her room to find her standing on her bed, backed against the wall, pointing at her collection of dolls. All 37 of them had been arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the room, every porcelain and plastic face turned upward, every lifeless arm extended toward the ceiling. What made the scene truly terrifying wasn't just the arrangement. It was the fact that many of these dolls had been sealed in display cases or storage boxes in Rebecca's closet. Someone, or something, had not only moved them, but had opened sealed containers to do so. That night, the entire family slept in the master bedroom, doors locked, lights on. The next morning, David called a local historian recommended by one of his clients to learn more about the house's past. The historian, an elderly man named Joseph Miller, was initially reluctant to visit, but eventually agreed after David mentioned the incidents with the water and the dolls. Miller arrived that afternoon, his face grave as he surveyed the property from the driveway. Joseph Miller, the Abernathy House. I was wondering who'd be next. Over coffee at the kitchen table, Miller revealed the house's troubling history. Built in 1874 by lumber baron William Abernathy, the mansion had been a showplace of wealth and status for the successful businessman, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 children. By all accounts, the family was happy until the winter of 1882, when tragedy struck. Eleanor had been bathing her youngest child, 5-year-old Sophia, when she was called away to deal with some household emergency. She left the girl alone for only minutes, but when she returned, Sophia had slipped beneath the water and drowned. Overcome with grief and guilt, Eleanor became increasingly unstable. According to local legend, she would fill bathtubs throughout the house and sit beside them for hours, staring into the water. She refused to allow the bathwater to be drained, insisting that Sophia might come back if the water remained. 3 months after Sophia's death, on the evening of March 17th, the household staff heard screams from the master bathroom, They found Eleanor submerged in the tub, her husband William trying desperately to revive her. Whether her death was an accident or suicide was never determined, but rumors circulated that William, having found his wife trying to drown their other children in her delusional attempt to reunite the family, had held her under the water himself. William Abernathy and his 2 surviving children left the house within the week, never to return. Over the next century, the property passed through dozens of owners, few staying longer than a year. There were no other documented deaths in the house, but local stories told of residents hearing phantom footsteps, finding inexplicable puddles of water, and some even claimed to have seen the ghost of a woman in Victorian dress, her clothing and hair dripping wet, wandering the hallways at night, opening doors as if searching for something or someone. Most disturbing of all, several families had reported incidents involving their children. In 1957, a 7-year-old boy was found sleepwalking toward the master bathroom in the middle of the night, claiming a wet lady had asked him to take a bath. In 1972, the teenage daughter of the then owners was discovered unconscious in an overflowing bathtub with no memory of how she got there. And in 1986, the young son of the Johnson family disappeared for 3 terrifying hours, eventually found huddled in a storage space beneath the back stairs, his clothes soaking wet despite there being no water source nearby. As Miller concluded his grim history, the kitchen faucet suddenly turned on at full blast, causing everyone at the table to jump. David rose to shut it off, but as soon as he touched the handle, every other water source in the house, bathroom sinks, showers, bathtubs, began running simultaneously. The sudden rush of water through the old pipes caused the entire house to shudder and groan. That night, the Mercers packed essential belongings and checked into a motel on the edge of town. They returned the next day, accompanied by Miller and a local plumber, to investigate the water system. The plumber found nothing technically wrong. No leaks, no pressure issues, no mechanical explanation for what had happened. But as they stood in the master bathroom discussing possible next steps, Rebecca screamed from her bedroom. The adults rushed down the hall to find her staring in horror at her closet. Inside, every item of clothing was soaking wet, as if recently submerged, dripping steadily onto the hardwood floor. But it wasn't regular water. The liquid had a faint greenish tint and smelled strongly of algae and decay like stagnant pond water. That was enough for Sarah and David. They moved out that same day, leaving most of their possessions behind. They stayed with Sarah's sister in Grand Rapids while looking for a new home, eventually relocating to a modern subdivision nearly 100 miles away. They told friends and colleagues they'd left because of serious structural issues with the old house, never publicly speaking about what they'd experienced. The Victorian mansion went back on the market in January of 1999. It sold surprisingly quickly to a retired couple from out of state who were unaware of its reputation. They lasted until April before listing it again. But the story of the Mercer family's encounter with the Abernathy House doesn't end with their escape. 3 weeks after moving to their new home, Sarah was awakened by Rebecca's screams in the middle of the night. She rushed to her daughter's room to find her standing on her bed, pointing at the floor where a large puddle of water had formed. Water with the same greenish tint and stagnant smell they discovered in the Victorian. On the wall above the puddle, visible in the moonlight streaming through the window, was a wet handprint, far too small to belong to anyone in the family. The incidents followed them for months. Faucets turning on by themselves, the sound of dripping water when nothing was wet, the lingering smell of algae and decay appearing suddenly in closed rooms. David and Sarah consulted a medium, who claimed that the spirit of Eleanor Abernathy had attached itself to Rebecca, drawn to the young girl's energy and perhaps seeing in her a replacement for the daughter she had lost. On the medium's advice, they performed a cleansing ritual involving sage and blessed water, reciting prayers, and firmly demanding that any spirits leave their home and their family. The phenomena decreased after this, but never disappeared entirely. Even today, more than 20 years later, Rebecca, now an adult with children of her own, refuses to take baths, only showers. She never leaves her children unattended near water, not even for a moment. And on the anniversary of their departure from the Abernathy House, the family sometimes finds small, unexplainable puddles of water in their homes, a chilling reminder that some attachments cannot be so easily severed. As for the Victorian mansion itself, it still stands on its wooded lot in rural Michigan. It's changed hands 15 times since the Mercers left, with no family lasting a full year. Currently bank-owned again, it sits empty, its windows dark, its grandeur fading. Locals avoid the property entirely. Children dare each other to approach the front porch, but rarely muster the courage to touch the doorknob. At night, passing motorists sometimes report seeing lights moving from room to room, as if someone were walking through the abandoned house carrying a lantern. And after heavy rains, neighbors say water can be seen flowing from beneath the front door and down the porch steps. Water that, according to one bold teenager who collected a sample on a dare, smells strongly of algae and decay. Some real estate listings advertise properties as having character or history. The Abernathy House has something else entirely, a lingering presence that continues to wait, watch, and search for what it has lost, drawing in unsuspecting families like the Mercers with the promise of a dream home that, for many, has become the setting of their worst nightmare.